Well, good morning and welcome to today's webinar. Look who's talking. I'm Beth Hawley with the Arizona Association of Realtors. Joining us today is Theresa Barnabei, having over 35 years in the business world, the first half being dedicated to the United Parcel Service and the back half devoted to real estate. Theresa brings a wealth of knowledge, experience, and practical advice to every presentation. Her passion for real estate has afforded her the opportunity to be a presenter on behalf of NAR and for associations and brokers throughout the country, including 4 years as a Keller Williams Gold Coach. Today's webinar will be about 35 to 45 minutes long. If you have any questions during the webinar, please write them in the question box and we will try to get them answered at the conclusion. If you would like to change the size of the webcam, simply click on the line separating the webcam and the PowerPoint presentation and drag. As always, today's webinar will be recorded and available next week at our website at AAR Online. So welcome, Theresa. How are you today?
I'm great, thank you. Glad to be here. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about who's talking and who should be talking when and how should we be prepared to talk as instructors in our classrooms. And my hope for today is that you get valuable information so that you launch 2018 with a new way of being in front of the classroom. So what I would love to do is kind of take a look right now at who's talking. So I have to tell you that we were talking behind your backs in front of you. We had a previous webinar with auditors and the auditors, monitors of our classes and the administrative staff for those who choose instructors. And I want to let you in on what was discussed during that webinar because we literally asked them to broaden their scope, to think bigger, to think differently when they're in the classroom evaluating us, our classes, our performance, our skill level, our techniques. And so I thought it would be smart to let you in on that so that you know what was being said, since this is a conversation about look who's talking. So the whole premise of that webinar was based on a concept of them helping us and taking responsibility to get us from good to great, from being a good instructor, which is good, to being a great instructor, which is better. And so today, I want to fill you in on some of the points that we discussed, but I want to take those same points and I want to turn them to our focus. What do we need to do in the classroom to be the best instructors that we can possibly be so that we can go from good to great? Now, if you're already great, and I'm sure some of you on this call are already great, then how can we get greater? And if there's one piece of information that you can garner from this webinar that will take you to the next level, whatever that next level looks like, then I'm going to encourage you to do whatever you need to do to instill one new thing that might change how your classes roll out. And during this webinar, please feel free to talk. Go ahead and write things in the chat. If I see them, it'll be great. I'll address them. If not, Beth will or Chris will, who's on the call with us. And so please do not hesitate to participate. And there will be times where it will be appropriate to participate just like in our classrooms. So here we go. So the basic premise of going from good to great is to understand what are the traits of a great instructor. And so in all the things that we could be doing to change our presence in the classroom, I picked 5. And I want to cover these 5 with you in a way that is relevant to you as an instructor in front of the room. And so let's start with number 1. Number 1 in my philosophy is that we have to be in the know. before we walk into that classroom, we have written a class or prepared to teach a class. And in the background information, we have to be in the know. And today in real estate, my goodness gracious, things change constantly. And it is so important that we're in the know. We understand today's consumer. Because when we understand today's consumer and what is important to them when they're buying and selling a house, then we have got to fashion our classes after what the consumer wants, who the consumer is, how the consumer buys and sells. And when we teach our students how to do that, we make them better when they leave that classroom. Now, the good thing is that a lot of us on this call are practicing agents. So we are already out there doing with today's consumers what we're teaching our students to do. And so before the class even starts, look in the mirror and ask yourself, is what I'm teaching relevant? Is this what I'm really seeing? Are these life situations that I'm teaching and not theory or not hypothetical situations? What are the issues out there today that I, as an instructor, take responsibility for getting our students ready to deal with the issues of today? And I understand that our personal experience is incredibly valuable, and it gives us the opportunity to incorporate stories that are relevant, and stories are tie-downs. So before you start teaching any class, I'm just going to ask you, you are the person that you're teaching. So how would you want to learn? And then that's how you get to teach them. Because we're on the streets, we're on the front line, we know what it's like, and we have a great perspective to teach from. The other thing is about getting in the know is to use the resources that we have available to us. So I don't know, if you would please type in the chat box, how many of you use the profile of home buyers and home sellers in your classes? So if you do, just go ahead and type yes. If you don't, go ahead and type no so that I can kind of get an understanding of how many of you are already familiar with this. Because this book right here, I have to tell you, it's like my reference manual. It's almost the same as the real estate law book. This is my reference manual because when I'm teaching students, I want to tie down the concepts that I'm teaching with the statistics from survey results that our buyers and sellers have spoken to us through. And so how's that looking, Beth? Because I'm not seeing the chat. So do we have yeses and nos? Okay, good. So for those of you that have yeses, congratulations. For those of you that have nos, look, the book is like $20 and you can get it off of NAR's website. And it is charts and graphs and statistics of buyers and sellers talking about why they bought, why they sold, how they went about it, what tools did they use, what do they want most from their real estate agent, what is the hardest thing in their real estate transaction. I mean, there is a wealth of information that we can incorporate in our classes that drive it home statistically. And it's not about having a class of statistics, but it is having a class where we bring relevancy into that classroom. And when you can go to statistics, and when you can go to an organization or research-based information like NAR's profile, then really what we're doing is we're adding credibility to any subject matter that we teach. Because not only is it your experience, not only is it your understanding, not only are we teaching Arizona law, but now we're teaching it from the perspective of the consumer. And just that little twist, when we teach a class from the perspective of the consumer, we're hitting the students right where they need to see it. So it's almost like we're hitting them right between the eyes. Look, this is what the consumer has said. More like the consumer's talking. So if the consumer's talking, let's pay attention to them. And in in using research-based information in your classes, seriously, I'm going to say it again, you raise the credibility of that class, and then you raise your credibility because you're in the know. Now, a lot of times, whenever I present new information, no matter where I'm teaching instructors, it's almost like, okay, but we have these regulatory guidelines that we have to follow. And yes, ADRE does tell us in a framework what should be covered, but how we take those guidelines and fit them into what matters today is what takes us from good to great. You know, I don't know, about 8, 9, 10 years ago, course creators started writing classes dealing with social media and the internet. And other schools would call us and say, how are you getting a social media class approved for agency? And I would say, well, just look at where the consumer is. At that time, I think 85, 86% of all the consumers were on the internet looking to buy their house. So for me, it was a no-brainer, because if we're going to represent our client base and understand where they are, then I go to the profile from NAR and I submit to ADRE that because a high percent of our consumers are finding their homes on the internet, I've got to teach students how to use the internet. If we know that the majority of the consumers are on Facebook, I've got to teach them what to say, what not to say, how to be compliant with advertising guidelines. And now all of a sudden, Facebook becomes a commissioner standards class. As long as I can always tie back my material to where the consumer is, I not only prove that I'm in the know, but I'm also taking my students to the next level of understanding in today's marketplace. And when I do that, that automatically takes me to step number 2. And step number 2 is be relevant in the classroom. A great instructor teaches material that is relevant to their audience. So we will always be teaching classes that are relevant to the real estate agent, student, broker in our class. And our courses must constantly be updated so that the subject matter that we're teaching is cutting edge and ahead of the curve. And when you get known for a reputation that your classes are relevant, that every time they come to your class, they get new and exciting information, that's how they keep coming back. That's why they keep coming back. You know, and we can't get stuck, and I know most of us don't, but it is a frustrating point to most instructors, is that we hear way too many times that students are in our class for the CE credit or to get the designation. And to me, the certification, the credit hours, whatever, that's bonus. That's a bonus for them coming and getting information that could literally change the way that they're doing their business, that really could make them more successful once they leave our classroom. So does that make sense? Anybody have any questions, comments? Anybody want to know a little bit more about how to do that? Go ahead and put that in the chat box, and Beth, let me know if any questions come across. So in terms of relevancy, while you're typing your questions, I want to take you to the next step of it. And I learned this when I was working with the folks on the last webinar, and that is that we are actually monitored on the audit and evaluation forms that are used. When a monitor or auditor comes into our classroom, we are already audited on, did we deliver relevant, accurate, current information that is pertinent to today's industry? That's actually a question on the form. And there's also another question on the form about relevancy, and that is, did we provide relevant examples of how the information can be applied to the student's practice? And I got to tell you, that application of what we're teaching is what I always call tie downs. If I can tie down a principle or a conversation piece or an item that I'm covering, and I can tie that down to real world, then that becomes even that much more relevant. And I can't expect them to connect the dots and assume that they're going to connect the dots the way I, as an instructor, think they should connect the dots. I have to make sure that those dots are connected, so that when I present what might appear to be theory, it's backed by facts and statistics, and then I tie it down and I take it outside the classroom and say, so next time you're in front of a seller and they're asking you to advertise in the newspaper, you have to show them the statistics that people aren't finding the homes in newspapers anymore. People are finding the homes on the internet. So therefore, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, my role as your agent is to expose your property to as many potential buyers as possible. And where the buyers are is on the internet. So now what I've done is I've presented a theory. I've backed it up, research-based, statistically based, fact-oriented, and then I tied it down to make it relevant when they leave that classroom. And that's I think, where things change. So I just wanted to share that with you, because I think that's a technique that if you bring it to the forefront of your mind, those people leave that classroom knowing exactly what to do with the information that you gave them. Now, some will, some won't, but we can't base our class on who won't. We have to base our class on who will. And I just wanted to bring that to the forefront. Now, when you start practicing by being in the know before we teach and teaching relevancy, the next thing that has to kick in is number 3, and that is belief in what we're teaching. Belief in what we're teaching. It's not enough just to teach the material. It's not enough just to get through 3 hours. And here's what I know. For those of us that are showing up on a Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock, I already know that you're probably already at the pinnacle because you're showing up, because you're hungry for more. And when you're hungry for more, what I know is that you'll show up to get more. And so when we show that we are in the know, when we talk about, hang on a second, I want to open my question box here. Yeah, I can't see my guy. All right, so when we demonstrate that we're in the know, and that what we're teaching is relevant, and that when I stand in front of that classroom, my belief in what I'm teaching just exudes from me, then I will be the only one in the room talking, because they want to hear what's being said. And so when you show up under that same premise, you're in the know, you're so ready to go, you're so excited about what you're teaching, you know that it's relevant, you believe that you are the best person to present this information in this time block that you have with these students, they'll listen. So some of us kind of question that a little bit, and they say, well, okay, I want to talk about disruptive students. Because sometimes I'm not the only one in the classroom talking. Sometimes they're talking, and sometimes they talk just a little bit too much. And I want to say that I'm going to make a bold statement here that some of us may not like hearing, and that is this. It's very easy to blame the disruptive student because they're the disruptive ones. And I got to tell you that I think that we have to change that paradigm for us first. That when we are so relevant and when we're so passionate and we have enough to prove as instructors and to help them learn it, we might just be presenting something that a know-it-all doesn't know. And that know-it-all becomes somebody who gets just as engaged as you and just as engaged as the next person. And so I just wanted to share that with you. And when we're talking relevancy and when we start incorporating stories, when you're telling your story that's relevant, they don't have to tell their stories. And so this whole premise right here might also be one way to control the classroom, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit more. So before I move on to the next one, Beth, do we have any questions so far? I am not seeing it on my screen. Yes, please. Yes. That, yes, yes, and yes. Absolutely, and thank you so much for sharing. All those are extremely relevant points, and that's why I do know that who's on this call is the cream of the crop. So thank you for sharing. So the next step is this, guys. When we are in the know, when we're relevant, when we absolutely positively believe what we're teaching, then what has to happen next is just passion. More passionate about what we teach. A passionate instructor is one who teaches because they know it will truly make a difference in the students' business practices, which truly makes a difference in their lives. The amount of reach that we have in our community is huge. It's not just the student that's sitting in the room. It's the student and all the clients that they're going to affect. It's the student and the family that they go home to. It's the student and how they live their life. So our role is huge. And when we know that, and I think we do, otherwise we wouldn't be teaching, then if we're vulnerable enough in the front of the classroom, I guess maybe that's a great point to talk about, when we're vulnerable enough in the classroom to allow that passion to just just come out, then the students will feel the difference between what would be an ordinary delivery versus an extraordinary delivery. And passion is the fuel behind an extraordinary delivery. When we go to that classroom with the forefront in our minds as to why we teach and why we're educators, it's going to come out. It has to come out. And there's nothing wrong with being vulnerable and passionate and showing our belief in front of the classroom. And that's why we're willing to get up there and do some of the things that we do. As crazy as some of us might be, or as crazy as some of the things that we do are. But if it's going to make a difference, then we're in. Then we're in. And when that passion is overflowing and the students get absorbed, that leads us into maximizing the skill set, which is number 5, that we bring to the classroom. You know, a good instructor becomes a great instructor when we get into mastery. And about 2 years ago, mastery became one of my favorite words. And I challenged myself to bring mastery to whatever I do. And in that mastery, my level of confidence goes up. When I show up as a master of my skill, a master of what I do, I automatically challenge myself to raise the bar on myself. And so I'm doing the same with you. I'm challenging you that even no matter what level of mastery you're at right now, can you bump it up a notch? Can you just bump it up a notch so that you are going from good to great to great to greater to greater to greatest? And then we know we've arrived. So when we look at our skill set, what I want to do today is I just want to talk about skill set in terms of classroom management. When we master our classroom, things change in that classroom. Issues are handled more easily, and interactive teaching techniques are easily incorporated. And so what I'd like to do is take us into time management, classroom management, and interactive teaching tools that engage our students. So for the remaining time, I'd like to break these 3 things down and talk about them a little bit more, starting with time management. Now, time management really starts out with the time outline and the curriculum that we are already putting in place. And that's what is getting approved. And so, of course, that's what we have to follow. Now what I'm going to ask you to do is make sure that in your timed outline you have built in the time for the statistical background for your storytelling. Build it in to your outline, and you will have time to teach the class the way you want to teach the class. If it's approved that way, then you're good to go. You just have to be prepared to teach it the best way that material can be taught. Which leads me into the next one. Don't write a 4-hour class and expect it to be delivered in 3 hours. And the reason why I know that is because there was a time where I mastered that. That's not the thing to master, because you know what happens. At the end of the 3 hours, we're running short, and we're cramming and jamming, and the next thing we know, we're talking so daggone fast that they don't even have an opportunity to catch what we're saying, much less interact with us when it's appropriate. So I know that as instructors, we have this wealth of information in our heads. And just like practicing agents, we want to tell the client everything that we know about a real estate transaction, but we have to piecemeal it, don't we? We have to give it to the consumer in little bite sizes. And so I'm going to ask you to do the same thing to the student. There is no doubt in my mind that you come into that classroom in the know, and your head's exploding with how much information you would want to share with them. And then therefore it becomes a 4-hour class. But I want to kind of shift our thinking a little bit. If I can teach 3 hours in a manner that they can get it, use it, and become more successful because of it, then 3 hours is enough. And then here's the cool thing, guys. If I do have information, so much information, that a 3-hour class could easily be a 4 or 5, a 6-hour class, the great news is write part 2. You know, one of the issues that we deal with is, how do I get people into my classroom? Well, if we write classes in stages, that I'm going to deliver my first 3-hour class, and I know that I have still so much more information to cover, then get them excited in this 3-hour class and invite them to the next 3-hour class. Invite them to part 2 because part 1 was so daggone exciting. And when they're in part 2, invite them to part 3 because part 1 and part 2 was so exciting they don't want to miss part 3. So we can take this valuable tool called unbelievable knowledge and really create additional classes, and then create the opportunity for those classes to get filled up so that one class feeds into the next class, which feeds into the next class. And so the next thing you know, I'm going to use this phrase, even though at Course Creators we try to avoid it at all costs. However, that's how people understand it. It's butts in the seats. They'll show up. When we combine everything that we've talked about, they'll show up, and they continue to show up. How many of you right now have a following, and you know you have a following? You walk into that classroom, and it's just like old home week. You know, in the first 5 minutes, you're hugging people, and you're saying hello, and you're thanking them for coming back to class. That is a gift. A gift. And I'm going to ask you to use that gift and have them come back and come back and come back. So in the chat box, go ahead and write if you have a following. How many of you have a repeat student following? Just put it in the box and be excited about that, because man, oh man, are we grateful that they continue to show up every time we show up. So just go ahead and jot that in the box, and then we'll see what it looks like in a little bit. So let me go to the third, which is mastering the material and the presentation. You got to know your material. Now, I have two thoughts on this that I would love to share with you, and of course, you please share me your thoughts in the chat box. I'm going to master my material and my presentation when I'm writing the class. So for those of you that are writing your own courses, isn't it so much easier to teach your own? Because as you've written it, you've learned it. As you've created your slides, you've learned it. As you've gone out and looked for your graphics, you've learned it. The videos, you've learned it. The timed outline, you got it. And then we get to practice the flow, and we get to practice our timing. It's a little different when you're presented with the information to teach. When you're presenting certification courses or designation courses, and I'm going to ask you to embrace that material just as much as if you were writing it. I remember I used to teach for Reback, and I literally would take the designation courses and I'd rewrite it. It's a lot, it's one of those big binders like this, right? And I'd rewrite it so that I wouldn't change the material, but I'd rewrite it. I'd refashion it in a way that I could teach it better. And that ownership of whatever material we teach makes a huge difference. And I just wanted to point that out, that staying on time in the classroom really is a combination of these three pieces of information for staying on time, which is time management. So I want to take you next to classroom management. And classroom management also has three basic premises. So the first one is to create the right environment. Sometimes we walk into classrooms and we just take the classroom the way it is, the way it's set up, and sometimes that's not the best seating arrangement. You're going to see when we start talking about interactive learning techniques and teaching styles that sometimes you have to create a learning pod. And I want to take you back to, for those of you that have children that were in kindergarten or preschool, or for those of you that remember being in kindergarten and preschool, those classrooms were set up in little teaching pods, right? So your child goes to this if they're working on reading, and your child goes to this pod if they're working on writing or letters, or they go to this pod if they're working on coloring in between the lines. And so when we fashion adult education after how our basic premise of education, this is how we learned, then we can pretty much change up a classroom to suit the right learning environment for how we're teaching the class today. The second thing is lighting is huge. So create the lighting. I remember we would go into classrooms and we literally would climb up on tables and undo the light bulbs that were right in front of the screen so that there was a better picture when it was on the screen. Music, getting them up before the class and during the break. And a lot of times we'll play the music really low because we think the most important thing is that they're catching up on business on breaks. But your job is to create a great environment, a great want-to-learn environment. And I just want you to keep that at the forefront of your mind. The other thing I want to talk about is controlling the chatter. So how do we control the chatter? Now I know we talked about, when you're delivering it with stories and statistics and passion and belief, that they'll want to listen. But, come on, let's get real. We still have those people who love to talk over us, who love to talk while we talk, who love to talk because they think everybody should be listening to them. I get that. So we're going to do what we can with everything that we've talked about so far. But now, what are the techniques that we need to put in place to control the chatter in the classroom? Because who's talking at any given time is extremely relevant. And so we have to pay attention. We have to look to see who's talking. And other students don't like to be disrupted. And I think that's something that we're all very sensitive to, because the person who feels the need to talk is interrupting and disturbing the person who's sitting next to them that they choose to talk to. So let's talk about controlling the chatter. What are your methods for controlling the chatter in the classroom? So I use a couple of simple techniques. Number one, especially when they're coming out of break or coming out of an interactive segment, I just say this in the mic. I say, if you can hear my voice, raise your hand. And then, of course, I show them what I want them to do. And I say, if you can hear my voice, raise your hand. And I say it low, because there's nothing worse than somebody screaming over the mic. Wouldn't you agree? So we're not screamers over the mic. We're not trying to talk over them. We're trying to bring them back. And so for me, if you can hear my voice, raise your hand. I say it low enough, the people in the front get it, and all of a sudden hands start going up. As the room gets quieter, you just say it again. If you can hear my voice, raise your hand. the middle of the room quiets down, the hands go up, and eventually the back of the room, when you say it a third time, if you can hear my voice, raise your hand. Just a technique to literally watch the wave of quiet go from the front of the room to the back of the room, and I'm using the students to help me make that happen. The other thing, of course, that a lot of us use is 1, 2, 3, shh. And after you do that a couple of times, the people in the room that are already hearing you are also shooing with you, and that starts to calm the room down a little bit. Here's another great technique. No, I didn't forget what I was going to say. I'm demonstrating a technique. That sometimes your command of the room is standing in front of that room, waiting for them. And you don't have the most pleasant look on your face. You're just waiting. And this is exactly how I'll do it sometimes. And then everybody starts wondering why it's quiet. And they'll start looking at you and they'll start staring at you and you'll say, great, thank you so much for coming back. So sometimes silence is a great technique to get students' attention. And silence really helps from you when there's a sidebar conversation going on. It's just 2 or 3 agents. It's not even the whole room. And then it's silence. And then it's like, okay, great. Let's all come back and have one conversation. Let's all come back and have one conversation. Thank you. And no matter how you control the chatter, I want to leave you with a statement in this section that a great mentor of mine taught me. And that is, reward the behavior you want. Reward the behavior you want. You might want to write that down. Reward the behavior you want. Because when you reward that they've quieted down quickly, that they've come back from break on time, that they asked short, succinct questions, then the people who need the recognition, which is why they're talking on sidebars and interrupting the class, they have a need for some type of attention. What you'll start doing is you'll start shifting their attention from just getting it any way they can to getting it in the way that they know you'll give it to them. Reward the behavior you want. So another thing about controlling the chatter is the rambling student who wants to give you the entire detail of every single transaction that they've ever done, and you don't have time for that because you didn't write that storytelling into your timed outline. So I manage the class up front, and I just say, look, there are going to be times where you have the opportunity to participate, and I welcome that participation. I'm only going to ask you that you give me the Reader's Digest version, you give me the short version, and in giving me the short version, I promise you will be able to take care of more of you and the questions and concerns that you have. And then when they start rambling, if I've already done this, I don't know if you can see my hand, but if I've already done this, then as they're rambling, I just go like this. And I get in that body position like, can you give me the short version? And sometimes I don't have to say it. Sometimes it's just, and if they don't get it, sometimes I'm like, and then sometimes I'll just say it. I say, okay, all right, give us the short version. Come on. And those are simple, polite techniques. You manage your expectations up front, and then when they start rambling, you bring them back in, and you use the techniques that you know will work. And then when they give you the short version, what do? You reward the behavior you want and say, thank you for giving that to us so short and sweet. And then you move on, whether answer the question, address the scenario, or go on to the next topic. I hope that helps in terms of classroom management, especially in controlling the chatter. And I'm going to go back to a point I made before. Guys, they are disruptive students, I get it, but we are also in more control than we think. And so set it up, manage their expectations, control it, reward the behavior that you want. And if those students are some of those repeat students, either they're not going to come back because they don't like not being able to talk, or when they do come back to the classroom as repeat students, they get your method. They understand how you control the classroom. and they'll know that they don't. And so it's training. It's training our students how we want them to show up in the classroom. But in order to train them, we have to train ourselves. We have to have specific methods in place to make that happen. So in the chat box, if you have a great method of controlling the chatter and controlling the classroom, go ahead and write that in. And since we're talking about chatter, Beth, do we have anything from previous comments in the box, questions in the chat box? All right, perfect. It's acknowledgement, recognition. So what I have learned in my studies, more so as a manager than anything else, is that there is research that says people crave recognition more than they crave monetary reward. So I take that philosophy and I say, oh my goodness, if it's just a matter of recognition, how many times can I give recognition to the student who is displaying the behavior that I want? And that's rewarding the behavior that I want. That's a reward. Recognition in and of itself will give you so much mileage in the classroom. So much mileage in the classroom. So if somebody, like I said before, if somebody asks a short, or gives you a short, sweet scenario, you know, they say, well, I have this transaction. Instead of saying, well, you know, I met the buyer at an open house and we went out and we looked at property for about 4 or 5 days. And then they finally found the house they wanted to buy. And I had them come back to the office and we wrote an offer. And I got to tell you, it took us about, oh my gosh, no, stop, please. But if they're doing the short version, they're doing the Reader's Digest version, and they say, I have a buyer, here was the situation relevant to the topic, and they say that in a very short, succinct way, thank them. Thank you so much for telling us that scenario so quickly. You made your points very clear. Let's address them. And then you move on and you do your part. Right? In the group activity, when we get to that in a second, when they're participating, you reward the behavior that they're participating. When they come back to break on time, thank you so much for coming back to break on time. Go ahead, Beth. Yes, that's beautiful. Excellent. Some of you use, I've seen instructors throw out candy. So yeah, you can do it physically, you can do it with your voice, you can do it with your body, and you can do it by gifts. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else have a technique that they use to control the chatter? Did anything else come up in the box, Beth? Mm-hmm. Yes. So share what they're talking about. Yes. Yes, and I want to qualify that. I was taught very early on in my speaking career that you never ask a question from the front of the room that you don't know the answer to when you're not prepared to deal with it. So be careful when you ask them to share with the class because you're asking them something that you don't know what the outcome's going to be. So be careful. Sometimes going up to them and just, you know, like being really friendly and just saying, hey, is there something you want to share? Without calling them out. You know, we've got to create a safe environment, so we can't call anybody out. So maybe it's just, do y'all have something to share based on what we're talking about right now? Please feel free to. I'd love to hear it. Yeah. Yeah. So just be careful on how you do it. But yes, that's also a technique. All right. So let's go on to the third, which is manage the disruptive question asker storyteller. And I think that we have addressed that enough, because that really does fall into controlling the chatter. And when you're noticing, I think this is the biggest point I want to make here, when you're noticing that the rest of the room is affected, not positively, by the disruptive student, the challenging student, the one who has to ask a question, the one who has to make a point on every one of your points, then you have to manage that person, because now they are affecting the rest of the class. And that's when that's when your management, your classroom management, has got to elevate, whether it's on break, having a one-on-one conversation. And when we talk about interactive teaching skills, you're going to see how you take that kind of student and you use that to their benefit and to your benefit. All right, so let's go on to the third in terms of our responsibility, and that is to invoke interactive teaching tools. And so I want to take you through three premises. I'm going to take you through three important aspects that we can move into the classroom. Because when we incorporate interactive teaching tools, the disruptions will naturally lessen, because they'll be engaged and they'll have opportunity for side conversations. They'll be able to ask their peers the questions that they're not asking you. And then they'll be busy in their assignments, and that's when they get to tell their stories. So when they're in group activities, it's not just that it's a great way for people to learn, because people learn better by being active participants in that learning, but it's also a way to manage the classroom in terms of increased learning and giving them a vent or an opportunity to talk. And so it's okay that we're not always the ones that are talking. And so one of the ways to get other people talking in our classroom in a controlled environment is to insert relevant videos. And I'm not going to go through how to do that, but if you understand YouTube Downloader, you can download anything from the internet, and then you can edit it and make it shorter and put your comments into it when you move it into a video maker. That's a whole class of its own. But you can insert relevant videos to the subject. Now, here's why videos are so important. Statistically, we know that adults use YouTube and videos for two reasons, and these are the top two reasons. Number one, they go to YouTube to find how-to videos, and I'm sure at least 1, 2, or 20 of us on this call have probably gone to YouTube to figure out how to do one thing. So adults, proven, go for how-to. So use the videos to show them how to use what you're teaching. And then they go to YouTube videos for education. So I thought I would demonstrate that today. If you've noticed, the whole theme of the class is Look Who's Talking, and the three movies, Look Who's Talking Now, and Look Who's Talking Too. And so I went on YouTube, and I thought, wow, I got to go see what's out there on Look Who's Talking, and I'd like to share this with you. So, short, sweet clip, it breaks up the monotony, but it gives people what they want. And I got to tell you, when we insert videos, it brings in that entertainment value, but it brings in that educational value as well. And they'll participate in videos, because how many times have you had a video shared with you? There's just a phenomenon that's happening about videos, and so just take advantage of it in your classroom. And that too is part of an interactive learning style. because it's not always you doing the talking, but it's like letting a video do some talking for you. And there are some really powerful videos out there that drive home points. You just have to be able to take the time to research them. I remember one time I did an agency class all based on Pretty Woman, the movie. It's one of my favorite movies. And some people will say, what's Pretty Woman have to do with agency? Oh my gosh, it's all over the place. And so what I would do is I would bring up an agency concept, and then I'd go find a video clip in Pretty Woman to make it happen, like to drive home the point. Unbelievable. And so a whole class is learning and watching, learning and watching. And watching those videos, I'm going to come back to something I talked about before. Those are the tie downs. Those are the tie downs. When you can take videos that are popular today and tie it down, and then they connect the dots. Oh, that's what you're talking about? I got it. Then, man, we've done some good work. Okay, so some other interactive learning, set up group participation. We know this. This is like role plays. These are debates. These are problem-solving segments. Have them teach a segment. There are countless ways for students to participate in learning activities. And when they participate, and it's not you talking or lecturing the entire time, they'll learn and retain more of the class information. So don't be afraid to get your students engaged in their own self-learning. It's all okay. It's not like you're slacking as an instructor. It's you teaching them how to learn and facilitating their learning at a level that we know that is research-based, that active participation increases retention. So I'm going to ask you to look at your classes and see where can I put in group participation exercises. And when they're in group, if they have the need to vent, they'll vent. The other thing that I would love to show you is how to utilize technology in the classroom. Now, technology is a great way to test comprehension, and the best way that I can show you that right now is through Poll Everywhere. So I don't know how many of you use Poll Everywhere, but it's literally you set up a question in the back office of your Poll Everywhere account, and it's free. And you can set up true, false, multiple choice, and then you invite them to take out their mobile device, because they've been jonesing to take out that mobile device anyway. So get them to take it out, and then you walk them through it. You say, okay, everybody, take out your phone. I want you to set up a text message. And now if you look on the screen, you'll see it, to 22333. In the subject matter, type Course Creato 564. And if you want to do it, go ahead and do it quickly. Set up a text message, 22333. In the body of the message, text Course Creato 564. And then you're logged into Poll Everywhere. And this is how the students would log in. And then they answer the question. It is acceptable that others talk. Is A the right answer? And if A is, then they would type A in the subject and hit send. B, when other students are talking. Or C, during interactive learning segment. And then literally the answers are scored on the screen. So if you were participating right now using that, we would be able to see your answers. There would be a blue bar going across, and we would be able to watch the responses from the students. Now, if I see that the majority of them are getting it right, I tested for comprehension, that subject point has been made, I can move on in my material. So I'm sure some of you use it. Some of you probably use some other tools and techniques. So if you're using other technology, please go ahead and put that in the chat box. So insert relevant videos, set up group participation, utilize technology, raise their level of comprehension, allow them to participate in their own education in a controlled environment. And this also will not only increase their retention, but it will control all that side chatter. They'll have their opportunity to shine if they're a student that needs to shine in your room inside the group participation. They'll be able to get their mobile devices out inside the technology. We know those situations exist in the classroom. We might as well write classes and plan for them. instead of not have a buffer and then be surprised that we're out of time or that we have disruptive students. Plan for it, folks. Until we've trained every single student as to how we want them to show up in our classroom, we have to plan for the disruptions when we're doing our timed outline. And so I'm hoping that you understand that there are a lot of different levels of who's talking in the classroom. And it is okay to you be the one who's talking, they be the one who's talking, or somebody else doing the talking for you as in terms of videos or in terms of them teaching a segment. All you have to do is be aware of who should be talking when. And that's the ultimate classroom management. So I want to take you back to the whole concept of why we're even looking at changing up what we do. And that is so that we go from good to great. And if you take any one of these pieces of technology, of classroom management style, of time management, of the 5 steps of going from good to great in terms of knowledge and relevancy and belief and passion and skill set, there's no doubt in my mind we will raise the level of professionalism in our industry one agent at a time. One agent at a time. Come into our class. When we're showing up the best that we can show up, asking them to show up the best that they can show up in the classroom and outside of the classroom, we will raise the level of professionalism in our industry. There's no doubt in my mind. And when you make that a mission, or you have a mission, let that exude itself in the classroom, and it will change the classroom environment. So that's our webinar. Thank you so much. And Beth, do we have any other questions or comments? Yes. Yeah, one thing I'll tell you, the biggest flub up is when we try to use links in our PowerPoints versus embedding them. So if you'll notice, when I did the video, I didn't use the link. I didn't click on a link that took me to YouTube, because what I have to trust when that happens is that the internet connectivity is good, that there's not a commercial in front of it, that it's not going to buffer on me. But when I use that YouTube downloader and I bring it in and I implant that, I embed that in my PowerPoint, and it's literally just a click, that always raises my level of confidence that I know that video is going to play the way I want it to play. So little tricks of the trade like that, so that technology doesn't become an issue. No embedding, no linking, embedding. Anything else, Beth?
That it would be nice if there could be small tutorials on how to use technology. So that's a great idea. We'll definitely work on that. And that's it. So thank you so much for everything, Theresa. That was great.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Beth and AAR, for allowing it to happen.
And I just wanted to let everybody know that our next webinar will be on September 19th, which will be a broker brief about wire fraud. So we hope to see you there, and have a wonderful day.
Bye, everybody.